Hey everybody, my name is Dalton Kerans.
And I'm Tyler Kimes.
And we're both farm bill biologists with Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever in East Central Illinois. And today we're going to be making a brief video on invasive species management that you can be doing on your own property during the dormant season.
So first question is, what is an invasive species? So an invasive species is something that is not native to your current area. And the reason why invasives are bad is because they can pose a threat to your native ecosystems as well as wildlife as well. So here we are now on this field edge here, and as you can see behind me, these invasives can get out of hand really quick. There's a handful there, as you can see already, but without proper management, invasives can get out of control fast. They also can outcompete your native wildlife and ecosystems, creating more harm than good, because this is a mess. So the first species we can kind of go over real quick is multiflora rose. You can see it's got these thorns on it. They produce these berries on them that birds love them. They get really thick and hard to walk through. Moving on to our next species here, we have bush honeysuckle. This stuff here, you can see it's very noticeable with its vertical striations it has. It has this brown tint to it. The branches and stuff break pretty easily. And your older branches are hollow, as you can see there. They are opposite with their nodes on them, and then they keep their leaves way longer than other things do, so they're easily found that way. Moving on now to our next one, we have autumn olive, which is this one here, but it's growing next to this hackberry, which is a native. Your autumn olive, they grow like this. They have a bunch of little runners and stuff they spread out. And autumn olive, they have alternate stems and leaves on them. They, like your honeysuckle over there, will have berries that they put off with a white flower. Now these fruits also are not very nutritious. They're spread through birds and other wildlife, but they benefit them very little.
So now the fun part. So now that Tyler's gone over some of the identification for stuff like autumn olive, multiflora rose, and bush honeysuckle, the next steps for you as a landowner is to figure out the density. How thick is this stuff that you're dealing with on your property? How big is it? What kind of money are you looking to put into it, or do you have the equipment on hand to deal with it yourself? And so that's what we're going to kind of go over today in this brief video as well. If this is something that you want to tackle yourself, it really doesn't take a whole lot of different equipment, and it doesn't always take big power tools like a chainsaw or a brush saw. Sometimes it's as simple as grabbing a pair of loppers, which you can find at any farm and home or any sort of farm store, and lopping them at the base. For the bigger stems too that we've looked at earlier in Tyler's other videos, you may need something like a chainsaw or a brush saw too. And then for some of the smaller species, you may even be able to just rip them out by hand if it's nice and wet soil, kind of like what we have today. These species are not very deeply rooted for the most part, and so it really doesn't take a whole lot to knock some of these out. So right here is an area that's actually pretty sparse in honeysuckle and some autumn olive. There's a couple little pockets of multiflora rose as well, but here's a perfect example of one bush honeysuckle stem that's small enough you can walk up to it and rip it right out of the ground. Unlike a lot of your native species, this doesn't have very deep root systems. So when the ground is soft like this, it's just as simple as ripping it out of the ground, knocking the dirt off, and throw it in the brush pile. So moving on from the one you can just pull out of the ground, this is a little bit of a step up, but it's the same species, a little bit larger. And so this is something you really can't maybe rip out of the ground just yet. And so you can take something like your loppers or maybe a small handsaw too. Get as low as you can to the base and just snip it off. Drag it out, put it in a pile. And so the nice thing that you want to do with your stumps is make sure that these are flush to the ground and as low as you can get to the ground. And that way you cut out any sort of tripping hazards or any sort of puncture hazards too for any vehicles or yourself. But then I would also recommend immediately treating that stump, which I'll show you later on in this video as well. So moving up from lopper-sized honeysuckle and then also autumn olive here, A chainsaw can be a very handy tool for anything on the farm, and it makes really easy work at cutting down honeysuckle, autumn olive, than anything else on your property that may be invasive. So we'll show you, here's a pretty simple flush cut with a chainsaw, and then we'll treat the stump after. So right here is a good example of a cut stump that is cut flush to the ground. Doing this will make it easier to apply herbicide. It also is more of a safe way of cutting it down. You don't want to leave any sort of sharp edges or anything on that either. But when you're applying chemical to this, all you have to do is basically apply it to the ring around it. You don't have to paint the entire stump, because that's just treating the cambium layer where the stump will be transporting all of its nutrients. One of my favorite tools that I have is actually my steel brush cutter. So this makes some of the more hard to get to, maybe more thorny species, a lot more enjoyable to cut down with. So you can see here, whenever I pick this up, and they do come with harnesses too, you can actually reach in without having to get down and under some of those thorny species. So right here I'm going to show you this multiflora rose, and also I'll knock down a couple honeysuckles too. So as you can see here, my favorite part of the cut stump removal of any sort of invasive species is just the instant gratification you have of actually cutting it down and just seeing all the open ground that we've created. And obviously we still have a lot of work to do, but this is just in the past 15-20 minutes of cutting. We've been able to knock out a bunch of honeysuckle, autumn olive, and multiflora rose just with a couple hand tools here. And we've actually turned that into what can be used as a habitat brush pile. So you can make these as big or as small as you want to. It's just about 20 feet off the edge of this field, and rabbits and other small game like birds can also use this throughout the winter months and also throughout the growing season as well. This will create a pocket for predator evasion, and then also create an insulated spot for wildlife to escape to in the cold winter months, especially after heavy snows. You don't have to make brush piles, but it is nice to kind of stack it all up and just like right away seeing all the open space you get. You're going to have a lot more sunlight reaching the ground through here, allowing more of your native forbs and grasses to grow. So this, of course, is not an autumn olive, honeysuckle, or multiflora rose, but it is something I wanted to show you guys as bonus information for a way of kind of getting rid of and eradicating maybe some undesirable trees on your property. It is something you can do also in the winter months. As you can see here, this is actually a tree that I hacked and squirted a few weeks back. Though the way that you do hack and squirt is you can just simply take a hatchet and then squirt chemical into each cut you make. The rule of thumb is for each inch of diameter at breast height, or DBH, is about one hack for every 2 to 3 inches of DBH. As you can see, I was a little bit more aggressive on this. And another way you can do it too as well, which I'll show you, is by girdling. So you can do that on larger stem species or undesirable trees. This isn't really something you want to do on a multi-stemmed species like honeysuckle or autumn olive. But for hack and squirt, I'm actually using a mixture of triclopyr and bark oil, which I'll leave the recommended rates to the label to go over that if you're interested. You can reach out to a Farm Bill biologist as well. But yeah, that's hack and squirt, and now I'll move on to actually doing the girdle. So this is the end result for whether you went with a hack and squirt or girdle. You obviously do not have to do both on the same exact tree. This is just for an example. But this is a great way to maybe leave some dead standing habitat for wildlife like woodpeckers and other stuff and other insects to utilize. But also you don't have to go through and put through all the labor of cutting it down, stacking it up, or dragging it out. So it is pretty low for labor intensity. You can move quickly through an area and do this. If this is a multiple stem species, you want to make sure you get every single stem. But yeah, it's pretty easy to do with just a hatchet, or if you've got the tool, use a chainsaw. But you know, like I said earlier, it's a great tool. We're using this in an area that's predominantly walnut and oak. So this species right here, this is a honey locust. It's just something that we didn't really want growing up and competing with our oaks and walnuts in this location. But yeah, that's how you do it. And this will stay standing for a while and break down over time. So one option that does not involve any sort of equipment usage, it's actually pretty easy. All it takes is either a small hand sprayer, a little backpack sprayer or something similar, and then also some Garlon 4 or other kind of triclopyr brand you can find, mixed with some basil bark oil, which acts as the carrier and the penetrant for the triclopyr. And so it's a really good way of getting rid of stuff like autumn olive and multiflora rose, but it's great for just small individual stem treatment. And so what you do here is you go off about the width of the plant or the diameter of it. And if this plant is about 2 inches across at the base, you want to spray about 2 inches up. And so if there's a bunch of snow on the ground, this is not the ideal form of management for it. But you want to go basically from the base up about 2 inches, since this is about 2 inches wide. And this can be used for autumn olive, multiflora rose, like I said. Also smaller trees like black locust, honey locust, and anything else that's undesirable on your property. It's not so much used for honeysuckle, but it can be used for many other things. Just make sure you follow the label. And last but not least, as you can see, when it gets super dense and very thick, you really don't want to go in there and try to basil spray or try to go through and hand clear it with hand saws, loppers, chainsaws, etc. Another option for more dense thickets of invasive species is having a skid steer go through here with some sort of a forestry mulcher or a fecon head. Something that's going to be a little bit too large for the bat wing to kind of knock down with your tractor. You don't really want to take your bush hog through here either. But we're going to attach a video after this to kind of show you just how quickly these can actually work through areas where it's a little bit more dense, but they are a little bit more costly. You can find a local biologist around you and can actually help you find a local contractor that can actually give you bids and go about that way.